It's Robert broadcasting to you live from Fredericksburg, Texas. How the hell is everyone? Give me 1 second here as I deal with my audio situation and shut this down. Bada bing. Okay, we are live. We are happening. Let me just check in with the YouTube crowd. All right. Yeah, we got nice levels today. Everything's looking really, really good. I'm just going to hang out for a little bit and wait for people to congregate and aggregate inside of the various portals and chat rooms so we can have a pretty good discussion this morning about where we are in the state of the union after what's happened with the two shootings. Let me just see here. Where are we at YouTube land? Let me mute that sucker. There we go. Let's see who's in the chat room. We've got Judy. We've got Mary. Hey, Mary. Isla. And there's Natasha. Fup77. There's Paulette. 10 Dragon 7. The gang is aggregating and congregating. It's good to see you this morning. I was on Clyde Lewis last night, and we got into some of this stuff. And it was an interesting show. Part of what I'm going to do today is bring some of the material that I unearthed last night and that we could talk about today. It's some astrological stuff that I think is really pertinent, and I don't want it to wait till next Sunday to get to it. And it's good for me to do it here with you guys because you guys have a pretty solid understanding about astrology. So it's like a kind of a high level dive when I'm able to do this with you. There's Kathleen and there's Ani. What's happening? What's going on out there? I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood yesterday because I was doing this show with Clyde and I wanted to get caught up and just to see if there was anything inside that Tarantino movie that might have been kind of interesting or a tell. And the answer to that is no. There's nothing in that movie that even remotely suggests that there was darker, more demonic forces at work in the film, or well, not in the film, but in the reality or the so-called reality of the Tate murders, which we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary, which will take place in 2 days, by the way. So we're talking tomorrow is the 7th, so that's Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the 8th is Thursday. So the 50-year anniversary of the Tate LaBianca killing. So now that was a murder spree, and what a lot of people seem to forget was that there were a series of 4 murders that took place in a pretty short period of time. There were 2 murders that preceded what happened at the Polanski Tate house on Los Cielos, and then after that there was the LaBianca murders that took place afterwards, with the intention of Charles Manson to start a race riot. And we got into that last night on Clyde Lewis, and it wasn't just Manson. There was another kind of whacked out prophet at the time, and the prophet basically said that he wanted to start a race riot in the United States and that the blacks would prevail over the whites, but then the Russians would come in and then take care of the blacks, and then the Russians would then attain their true dominance, which is an interesting theory and perhaps not so far out of line as to what people today might put together and have as their strange prophetic hard-on for what is about to take place or what should take place. So let's be clear. I'm going to get into some material today. I'm going to play you a video of Beto O'Rourke in a minute that's going to blow your mind when you see this video. And I'm going to talk about what happened in both cities. And I'm going to now. Some of you watch the Sunday night show, and you know that I brought in some video. It's pretty clear that there is a completely mistaken identity, or there is an identity jumble with this Crucius character in El Paso. And then the Connor Betts character is another story altogether. Well, I'm going to get into some of that when we look at the charts today. And you'll see sort of the astro synchronicities or the astro syncs that are involved in what's taking place. So let me play you this video of Beto O'Rourke. It's going to blow your mind. Think Robbie Parker. And I want to thank Beverly for sending me this video because it was under my radar. And once I saw it, I was shocked. But not shocked, as you'll see. Here we go. This is Beto O'Rourke talking about what happened in El Paso and his official response.
I'm incredibly saddened, and it is very hard to think about this. But I'll tell you, El Paso is the strongest place in the world. This community is going to come together. I'm going back there right now to be with my family and to be with my hometown. And I want to thank the El Paso Police Department and the first responders. They're there right now, and we're going back to be with them.
WTF? What the fuck? I mean, what does the giant leprechaun think that's so funny about what just happened? That makes Robbie Parker look like Sir Laurence Olivier. Okay? I mean, that is disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. I'm going to play it again. I'm going to play it one more time because I think it's really important to watch. You guys get a double dose of this thing. It's only about 44 seconds long. So here we go. One more time. Beto O'Rourke.
I'm incredibly saddened, and it is very hard to think about this. But I'll tell you, El Paso is the strongest place in the world. This community is going to come together. I'm going back there right now to be with my family and to be with my hometown. And I want to thank the El Paso Police Department and the first responders. They're there right now, and we're going back to be with them.
I'm speechless. And I'm not sure why more people in the media don't talk about this. I mean, I know why they don't talk about it. It's just one of those rhetorical questions that we always ask ourselves. Like, how come the media isn't drilling down on the fact that this Connor Webb character, whoever he is, seems to be a hardcore Satanist, a bully, somebody who is deeply invested in the left, has quoted Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has quoted Liz Warren. Why are they not talking about that? Why are they not drilling down and identifying this guy as being basically a borderline Antifa proxy or an Antifa agent or an Antifa cutout? There's no mention of that. And then there's, look who's here. The big man decided to join the party. And there's no mention also of Patrick Crusius, who basically is like invested in some kind of universal income. I mean, he's essentially spouting sort of white nationalist, quote unquote Nazi rhetoric. That's what he's doing. But nobody's really talking about those things. What they want to do is they want to take a big broad brush and they want to paint them as white supremacists and white nationalists, because this is the new Russiagate. This is the new Russiagate. Now they're not talking about Russiagate anymore, now are they? They've moved on from Russiagate, although they'd love to use the bot whenever they feel like they need to. Whenever they want to roll out the bot game, they'll do that. You know, they'll use the bots, or they'll use some sort of Russian influence if they want to tar and feather Tulsi Gabbard. Well, that's fine with them. They'll do that. But they won't drill down to the actual specifics of who these characters, whoever they are, supposedly are. And with the case of Patrick Crusius, I've seen that there are at least 3 different Patrick Crusiuses, and he's in lockdown now. I don't know what'll happen to him. I don't know if he'll suffer the same fate as Robert Lee Bowers, who evaporated. And Robert Lee Bowers is, of course, the synagogue shooter from Pittsburgh. Once he was apprehended, this is a guy who had very little past, very, very little past, supposedly lived at some dump apartment, kept to himself, and then all of a sudden decided he wanted to go on a rant on 8chan. And 8chan, by the way, has been taken out. Their provider, Cloudflare, has kicked them out. Now, apparently they're on some kind of blockchain server. So 8chan is still operable, but it is no longer on Cloudflare. And they have had a couple of different, within the last 48 hours, they've had a very interesting sort of path. And they've gone to a couple of other different servers who, once they figured out that they were 8chan in disguise, they kicked them out. Now, 8chan has supposedly been branded a white nationalist hate channel. 8chan, get it? It's not necessarily true. And these platforms have been seeded. And now 8chan is an offshoot from 4chan. And basically 8chan was where the QAnon phenomena really broke. And there's other things happening on 8chan. It's not just QAnon. But it seems to be a place where people aggregate who have alternative theories about what's going on. And of course, every single manifesto that was produced has been on either 8chan or Gab, or so these places where people congregate to talk about what's happening, where theoretically free speech is still free, have been, in my estimation, compromised. And they've been used as intelligence honeypots so that they can draw people in, figure out who's going to respond to the material, who's going to react to the material, put the manifestos up. That way the manifesto is associated with that portal so that they can go after that portal. That's how the game works, and that's how it's working, and it's working very, very well. Because the narrative has shifted from Russia to race. Trump is not a Russian agent anymore. He's a flat-out racist. Cory Booker, who else? Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo, Beto O'Rourke. Everybody has no problem calling Trump a racist. Meanwhile, Trump is addressing the nation, and he's talking about stricter gun control laws. He's talking about the red flag laws, which will red flag somebody very quickly if they think that they are a threat or a menace. And they'll look at their internet postings, they'll look at what's going on Facebook, they'll look at what's going on Twitter, wherever they're posting on social media, and very quickly they'll make an assessment, and they can be denied a lot of different things. Specifically, they can be denied a gun. If you are red flagged, you're put on a list. And if you go to purchase a gun, they can deny you. And the red flag laws could go even further in that people can be actually taken out of circulation because of the threat that they may pose to society at large due to their mental health or lack thereof. This is all pre-crime stuff. It's all pre-crime, Orwellian, Philip K. Dickian stuff. It's happening. It's happening right before our eyes. And you see how efficient the machine is, how efficient this kind of egregore generator is when they decide to put it into action. Because just a few days before these events that happened over the weekend, the FBI released a memo surreptitiously through Yahoo. And Yahoo posted that so-called conspiracy theorists would be branded domestic terrorists. Okay, that's a reality. And within days after that, we had these shootings or so-called events that took place. And you could just see the efficiency of the machine. You could see the efficiency of this program. It's like a program. It's just been activated. And as far as the shooters go, I mean, it's a jumbled mess. It's a jumbled mess, and I believe that the media, if they wanted to, they could go through there and they could use their fine-tooth comb and they could sift through everything. That wouldn't be a problem. But they don't. And part of the reason for that has to do with the fact that they don't want to. They want to create a feeling of confusion, chaos, disruption, frustration, so that people like you and I, and that number is growing, by the way, who are really looking at what took place, are putting the pieces together, that our group will feel frustrated, will feel like there's nobody representing us. This is an important piece to wrap your head around. And for all intents and purposes, that's probably true, by the way. I was having a discussion last night, and it was about so-called civil rights. And the question I posed was, if you, and I brought this up before, if you were a political leader, okay, and your main goal was to cement your position and hold on to power, and power was your drug of choice, not helping the people, not serving, not trying to create a paradigm that would be sustainable for the long term, wouldn't you want people who were dissenters? Or wouldn't you want people who were clamoring for the truth to be removed, to be eliminated? Wouldn't they be a threat to your hegemony and your power trip? And I don't care if you're on the left or the right. There are people who are in power whose main goal, sole goal and purpose is the acquisition of power. Wouldn't that just justify your cause? So on the left, of course, we can make a case where the left would say, yeah, we want these people banned. We want these people deplatformed because they represent a threat to our program, which is social Marxism. And that's pretty much out in the open. But people on the right would also probably want those people out of circulation as well, because they would pose a potential threat for them if they themselves were not adhering to their own policy, ideology, and dogma. They would put them to the test and say, where are you with this? Why aren't you stepping up? Why aren't you coming to the plate here and supporting this idea that our reality is manufactured, that these events are staged? Why aren't you involved in uncovering this? Whatever the quote-unquote injustice is. Because I guarantee you, most people at a high level are either compromised or they don't give a shit. So it's in their best interest to go along with the party program, which is, let's eliminate this idea of truth. Let's eliminate this idea of people that are pulling back the veil. It's just common sense. If I were a plutocrat, and my goal was to attain and retain power, I would do everything in my power to make sure that that happened. And if these so-called patriots or truth seekers or alternative researchers got in my way, I'd partner with the other side in a heartbeat, if that was my goal. Now, if that wasn't my goal, then it would be much more difficult. And I'm not saying that everybody inside of Congress and the Senate are that deeply compromised. I would say a lot of them are, though, especially ones that have been around a while. So this idea that the media can't get it right is wrong. They could if they wanted to, but they choose not to. And that's part of the program. That's part of messing with your head. That's part of riling us up, getting us all frustrated, getting us all pissed off, and then talking to ourselves. Because that's what we do. We talk to ourselves. And that's not a bad thing, right? Talking to ourselves is not a bad thing because we get to work things out. At the very least, we don't feel like we're alone or isolated because we get to have these discussions or we get to bring these ideas to the forefront. But that's kind of where they stay. They don't gain any traction because now The way that this thing has been set up is brilliant. It's totally brilliant. We go back to last year, and that's when Alex Jones was in Dante's Inferno. So Alex Jones was in hell, and one of the things that got Alex Jones in trouble was the fact that he took on Sandy Hook. And Alex really should have just owned that instead of saying, I never said these things. I mean, the internet has a very long record of what we've said or done. It's like the new Akashic Records in a lot of ways. And it's clear that Alex Jones did say those things. And he tried to backtrack and he tried to change, and it made him look bad. You know, did it forestall any of the lawsuits from the Sandy Hook parents? No. Did the media change their opinion of Alex Jones because he was somehow trying to rearrange the past? No. They were just as vicious and savage with him as a result of his tirade and his, I thought, poorly planned out and executed contrition, and coming back to the fold and saying that he didn't say those things was completely wrong. And he said it over and over and over again. I guess he thought if he said it enough that people would believe it, and that in itself would become true, and that maybe, just maybe, what he did say would ultimately be expunged from the internet. That ain't happening, because once somebody gets something, they'll store it, they'll put it up, they'll put it on websites, and that stuff is around, trust me. And intelligence agencies have this stuff too. They've got everything. Everything. And so it may be expunged from the internet, but it won't be expunged from their storage or their data, their cloud. That's not going to happen. Anyway, so Alex Jones starts to get taken down. And the Sandy Hook thing is big because what it does is it creates kind of this sacred cow in a lot of ways that's inviolate. Like, you can't go there. You can't question these events, because if you question the events, here's what will happen. Well, you might get sued. You might get sued by, say, the parents of the events. So if you question now the validity of what happened in Dayton or the validity of what happened in El Paso, there's precedent. The so-called parents or people who might have been connected to the people who theoretically died in these events, they could hire a lawyer and come after you. And if that doesn't happen, then at the very least the media can come after you and say, oh, here we go, here's another denier. Here's another denier. So they've created already this kind of, it's like a mini version of the Holocaust in some ways. Because there are people who deny the Holocaust, or they deny sort of the numbers of the Holocaust, or they deny the fact that the Holocaust existed or happened in the way that that history has said it happened. And if you want to get probably deplatformed, or you want to lose any kind of your income stream, go there. You go there, and you're pretty much toast. You're subatomic toast. Well, what they've done is they've created another little mini version of that with Sandy Hook. And that when you go into these events, you begin to question the validity of the events, the specter of Sandy Hook, Alex Jones, all the hell that he went through, it's all in the recent past and our recent memory. So they took Alex Jones down, and then they created this minefield, and for all intents and purposes, a psychic wound, so that people that go into that place to talk about these things have to navigate through that. And knowing that this has occurred, it can actually create a form of self-censorship. Like, I know it's occurred. I know what Alex Jones went through. So what happens is when I talk about things, I think about, okay, well, what can I talk about? How can I talk about it? You know, at what level can I share something without self-censoring? It's a very interesting exercise. Trust me. You got to try it one day. It's a very interesting exercise, and something that can be very, very helpful. In a lot of ways, it's almost like a spiritual practice, because I have to sort through the potential outcome of my thoughts. And it's a very, very powerful place to be. If you could raise it up to another level, that your thoughts and words do have power, immense power in a lot of ways, that you can apply that to your life. So it's a spiritual practice in a lot of ways. And when I run through this, right, on, on a moment-to-moment basis, this is kind of what my reality is. Not in a bad way, because it helps refine the edge and sharpen the edge. So now when we talk about this, there are so many minefields that we can step through. And as I mentioned, the media itself, they don't care. They don't care, and they know if they wanted to, they could dive into something and they could make it a news story for as long as they want. Look how long they banged RussiaGate for. They banged RussiaGate for 2 years. And you notice that almost immediately after Mueller and that whole Mueller escapade and fiasco happened, they were on to something else. And racism is the new call to arms. And this is a very dangerous one because the race factor was stoked during the Obama administration with Black Lives Matter. Of course, you don't see Black Lives Matter much, or do you? No, it's because it was an Obama Soros-funded agitprop group with ties to CPUSA. That's what they were. And the racial flames were fanned during the Obama administration. I've talked about this many times. Not at one point did Obama ever come out and say that we need to pull together as a country. We need to put down the black and white rhetoric. We need to really bond. We don't appreciate police brutality on any side of the fence, whether it's black or white. I will hold the police forces of America accountable in all areas of their potential indiscretions. He could have used that moment. He could have used that moment to get into corruption and graft inside of various police departments around the country, but he chose not to. And he chose not to because that was his role. His role was to create division. Trump comes in, and Trump becomes a piñata. He becomes a piñata for the race card. And now we're fully into this. We are fully into basically turning the United States into South Africa. That's where we are. And that's not a good place to be for anybody. I don't care if you're white or black or brown. It's not a good place to be. Because look what happened to South Africa. They went from South Africa's not perfect. It wasn't a utopia. They were working on dismantling apartheid. It wasn't what de Klerk was coming in and trying to dismantle it. So it wasn't like it was going to be their de facto regime. But it was successful. South Africa had a very, very successful country. You can't deny it. It cannot be denied. It was successful because it used slave labor. Well, maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. But the fact of the matter is they were in the process of changing it. But look at it now. It's a very tenuous place to be. Very, very tenuous. And there are stories upon stories of farmers, having their homes invaded and people being raped and killed and burned and torched. I mean, it's horrible. Nobody ever talks about that. That's never an issue. There are South African children. If you want to play the child card, and the children seem to be so freaking important to the left. You want to play the child? There are children in South Africa who are essentially, raped and assaulted and murdered, but nobody talks about that. But that's what's happening here now. The United States, they've created this narrative that this country is imposing apartheid on minorities, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Could not be further from the truth. But don't let a good false narrative get in the way of reality, because that's what's happening. And so now the race card is really, or the race issue is a big one. And as long as Trump is in office, they're going to continue to play that card because the RussiaGate card is done. It's done. And this is ultimately where they wanted to go anyway. They wanted to get to the race card, but they wanted to play the RussiaGate thing out for as long as they possibly could so that they could throw a monkey wrench in the system. and create division and strife and, more enmity between people and, all these tactics, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. But ultimately, I think this is where they wanted to go. So once they've sown enough enmity between people, they go to next level, right? And this was next level. So what I want to do is I want to bring in some charts now because I wanted to talk about some astrology. And one of the things that, if you watched the show last night with Clyde Lewis, one of the things that we talked about was this recurrent theme of what happened on August 8th, 1969. And here we are 50 years later, moving into this kind of same hemispherical discussion about the Tate LaBianca murders. And there's some very interesting parallels, one of which is the shooting in El Paso took place at the Cielo. It's a mall, right? So it's like Cielo. It's like the Cielo Mall or Cielo Shopping Center. It's not just Walmart. It's in a larger area, right? So that comes back into Los Cielos, which is where Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski lived when Manson's crew went up there and wreaked havoc, right? Just got some bad news here. The city of Fredericksburg just voted 4-1 to allow the pipeline to come through the city council. Can you imagine that shit? We're going to have a pipeline now. Kinder Morgan is going to get their pipeline. So the city is getting money from Kinder Morgan. People are going to be pissed. They're going to be pissed. So now what's going to happen is that I think the city of Fredericksburg, I'm sorry, this just came across the screen. The city of Fredericksburg is going to have to the citizens are going to have to sue the city. That's what's going to happen because that pipeline is going to go very close to the school. The school district already voted it down. I'm sorry, getting a little off track here, but that just came across my screen. I just saw it. It's like, that's bogus. I've got more to talk about with Fredericksburg because we are on the front lines, some heavy duty stuff happening here with this gas pipeline and this, what's called the bypass, all slated to come here. It's like now they're targeting the small cities, which I'll talk about later. Anyway. So what's happening also, this is very interesting because of the connection between Los Cielos and the Cielo shopping center, which is where this Walmart is located. And this Walmart is on Gateway Parkway, and I noticed that last night. It's on Gateway Parkway. And apparently, LaBianca's father owned a series of grocery stores called Gateway Groceries. So there's these very interesting parallels with not just El Paso and Los Angeles, but also Los Angeles, Charlie Manson, and Dayton. All right, so what I want to do is I want to bring up Charlie Manson's chart. Okay, so here we go. This is Manson's chart. So there's some important things here to notice and to take note of. Okay. So, of course, Manson has a grand cross, and they're all fixed planets, with the exception of Pluto, which is in the final degrees of Cancer. But he's got probably the biggest stellium of Scorpion planets I've ever seen in a chart. But look at his ascendant. Taurus is an ascendant that is going to play a role in the next three charts. And Taurus represents the Earth. Remember that. Now, even though Charlie Manson is theoretically dead, I did a transit chart on his chart. And you can see that transiting Uranus is exact his ascendant. And what is Uranus? It is revolution. It is change. It is chaos. It's radical. Right? So here we have Uranus enacting the chart of Charlie Manson. Everything that Manson espoused and talked about, the chaos that he wanted to trigger is right here. It's right there. Now, he also has this Capricorn midheaven, and Pluto has just crossed over the midheaven, which is the transformation of the world. So in these two very important cardinal points, Manson and his chart, even though he is deceased, has a kind of living record of what's taking place 50 years later. Like what he sowed the seeds for is now occurring 50 years later. And the parallels are pretty stunning in a lot of ways. Like supposedly Connor Betts, the kid from Dayton, Ohio, was into Charlie Manson, right? He was into Charlie Manson. And the kid from Ohio was supposedly a Satanist. Sound familiar? So here we go. The transformation of the world is taking place with Pluto near the midheaven, just crossing the midheaven. And then the radical activation of these energies on Charlie Manson's ascendant in Taurus, which is the rearrangement of material matter, right, in the immediate environment. So the world gets rearranged because Taurus represents the earth. All right. So remember right here, Taurus on the ascendant. Okay, so let's go to the chart of, let's see, I believe this is the chart of the Tate killings. Let me see here. What do we have? Here we go. So this is the Tate murders right here. Look at the ascendant again. It's in Taurus. So this is at 11:55 p.m. in Los Angeles. And we have, because that's about when they show up. And their orgiastic murder spree theoretically moves into the following day. Right? So they finish up on the 9th of August, although they start on the 8th of August. And as a result of this, right around this time, 11:55 p.m., we have the 55 showing up. 5s, 23, they're all part of the numbers that are associated with this. Like if you break down the date, August 8th, 1969, it's a 23 or a 5. And we have 11:55 p.m., just before midnight. And we have this 0 degrees Aquarius on the midheaven. So the idea here would be to initiate the dark Aquarian age, right? That's what it's about. It's the initiation of the dark Aquarian age, right here. And of course, there's what? There's a yod. And we have a yod from Saturn and Venus to Mars, and the chart Mars and Sagittarius. And this is the finger of God, right? And this is what's called the fulcrum planet, or the nozzle planet. And I was reading some stuff from Robert Wilkinson last night, who wrote the Aquarius papers. And he was a very kind of early hit on the internet in terms of astrology. And one of the things that he talks about with the yod and the two quincunxes that are part of the yod, he uses the word sacrifice. He says that it takes multiple sacrifices in order for the funnel planet to be drained of the excess or the effluvia of the quincunx here, right? Multiple sacrifices. I thought that was an interesting use of the word sacrifice. What he's really meaning is that the individual theoretically has to sacrifice a number of things in their life in order to fully integrate Saturn in this case and Venus in this case. Now, this is a social event. It's funny, I was living in Southern California in 1969 during that time. I lived in Southern California for a brief period of time. During that, I lived in Southern California for another period of time during the early 2000s, from 2002 to 2000 and almost 2006. So I have spent some time in Southern California. But that time in 1969 was quite interesting because it was really in the sweet spot of the end of the Summer of Love and the beginning of this very kind of dystopian, sort of nightmarish time that was about to descend upon America with the Manson murders, the death of Jim Morrison, the death of Jimi Hendrix, the death of Brian Jones, the death of Mama Cass Elliot, Altamont. It becomes a very, very dark time. It's like the CIA and the Alphabet Agency said, okay, the fairy tale's over. We're drawing the curtain back into place. Thank you very much. The love, peace, hippie circus is moving on. And that's what happened. That's what happened. I was a kid living in Southern California at that time. And I was very much aware of my surroundings. I could feel the 60s kind of breathing into my consciousness on a fairly consistent basis. So here's the yod that's taking place. And it's with Mars. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to bring up the Dayton chart. So remember, the Taurus ascendant, it's the same ascendant as Charles Manson. And Saturn here in the 12th house is indicative of deeper, darker forces operating behind the scenes. That's the nature of the 12th house. And here we have, guess what? Here's Chiron at 6 degrees. Where's Chiron now? Let's find out. Let's go to the Dayton chart. Here's the Dayton chart. Lo and behold, where's Chiron? Give it up, Chiron. Where are you? Come on, Chiron. 5 degrees. Chiron is 1 degree off of where Chiron was 50 years later, obviously, right? This is how Chiron works. So this is the Chiron return of that event. And what is Chiron in Aries? Violence. If you look at that period of time, it is a violent time. It's extremely violent. It's not just the Manson murders. Of course, you had the Zodiac killer. We had Patty Hearst and the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army. The Weather Underground was still running around setting bombs. It was a very violent time. People seem to forget how violent it was. Extremely violent. Altamont, which I talked about. It's all happening here. Chiron. So Chiron is going through its Chiron return. But also, what do we have here? Taurus on the ascendant. Because this is what happened in Dayton at 1:05 a.m. in the morning. 23 degrees, Taurus on the ascendant. So we have 3 Taurus risings. The Manson chart, the chart for the Tate murder, not LaBianca, but the Tate murders, and then here in Dayton. So Dayton is a bookend. Dayton is a bookend with El Paso in between. And again, what do we have? We have a yod. And where's it going to? Mars. So this is an event that has been duplicated. It's almost as if this egregore consciousness is recycling the elements or the unused elements from that time and resurrecting them so they can be used once more for, in some ways, the completion of this perverted and insane idea that Charles Manson had for a race war. And look at what's been happening in this country for the last decade, since Obama stepped in. What happened? What happened when Obama stepped into office? There was the professor who got busted for breaking into his own home. That was one of the first things that happened. It was kind of a signature event. And I believe it was somewhere in, was it Harvard? It was in Boston. And this professor had lost his keys or something. He was breaking into his own home. And that became kind of this watershed event of the Obama administration. It happened very, very quickly. And when that happened, I knew that we were going to be in for a rough ride when it came to the race issue. Because all of a sudden now it's like, oh, I was being profiled and I was being hassled. Well, it just became exacerbated over the next 8 years. And during the Trump administration, and I don't believe Trump is a racist, by the way. He's not a racist. But I also don't believe, I also do believe that Trump is not above using some of the Alinsky-like tactics in order to polarize and gain support. Remember, he's a Gemini, He's got a Gemini Sun conjunction with Uranus. And so polarization is inside of his chart. Now, do I believe that Trump wants to make America great? I think it's a very good marketing slogan. I wish he would. He certainly has made Israel great again. Israel hasn't had a better president than Donald Trump. He's been the best president. He's been the best friend that Israel could ever have. And everybody who might be so-called Jewish may want to take this into account. As you slam Trump, reflexively slam him, look at his relationship with Israel. He's been their number one goy, okay? And right? So, goy number one. He's been their favorite goy. And he has. I wouldn't necessarily say he's made America great again. Has he tried? You know, you get stuff with Trump. He pulses. You'll get things that are interesting, and they're like, wow, that's great. And then there's like, what? Which I've talked about before. And it's off and on and off and on. And I think it's part of some higher kind of esoteric pattern. That's what I think. What's really interesting is that they have reinstituted the federal death penalty, where they're about to. And that means that the feds can now execute you. If they find that you're guilty of a crime that is executable, which could mean theoretically something along the lines of a domestic terrorist, they can do it now. They don't have to wait for the state that it's taken place in. And I think this is a bit troubling, to be honest with you. So I think it's a bit troubling, even though a lot of people on talk radio love it. Oh, this is great. And they point to a bunch of people who've done some incredibly heinous crimes. Of course, there's rape and murder. They've got about 6 people that they're able to cite that are on death row. And they say that every single one of them should just be gone like yesterday. So talk radio just checks that box and says, let's do this. But there are deeper implications to these things, much deeper implications. And talk radio is not that deep. Trust me. It's not. So in any case now, we've got at least 2 years of Trump, who has, for all intents and purposes, been the wicker man. He's been the white wicker man for so-called people of color. And they've been able to use him as a punching bag and a springboard to a new narrative. And that new narrative is that racism only exists with so-called whites, and so-called whites are responsible for everything. And now all these 2 guys, of course, they have manifestos. Of course, you can't have a shooting spree without a manifesto. You can't have it. It's not going to happen. So I'm never going to write a manifesto. And I heartily suggest that none of you write manifestos either. But that won't stop people, right? If they want to write a manifesto for you, I'm sure they can. That's not a problem, right? There's probably a software program out there that'll write your own manifesto, even if you don't want it. Anyway, but that's what they've done. They've used now Trump as this pole to create this duality. And now the racial fires are really being stoked in a very significant way, and in a way that's very troubling, to be quite honest with you. I think it's very troubling. And if you look at these charts, to some degree, it is the fulfillment astrologically of what Charles Manson, with that event, theoretically set out to do on that night, on August 8th. 50 years ago, 2 days from now. So what do we do? Again, it comes down to, okay, Robert, what do we do? Well, what you do is you don't buy into the hype, and you have to live your life every day with character and integrity and as much responsibility as you can muster. And it's not always easy. And you have to be able to live with the sense that, guess what? God is within you, and that it's really important to touch base with that and stay in touch with that. Because that's, when you listen to some of these channels that tend to be Christian. They say, well, if you believe in Christ and Christ lives within you, you'll get through all this. I have a hard time with the dogma, but I don't have a hard time with the sentiment because I believe that to be true. Okay? I believe that to be true. And for me, I like to call it the cosmic Christ because it is something that transcends any religion or belief or faith. And it exists and dwells within each and every one of us in every single atom and molecule of this planet. It was a new override on the planet. The consciousness was a new override on the planet. And they've been doing everything in their power to override that override. And that's why we have genetically modified foods. That's why we have the spraying in the sky. That's why we have all the crazy stuff in our blood. You know, if you want to get into Herodotus Velo land and the black goo, that's why this stuff is happening. Theoretically, it is a scientific override of the original blueprint of that consciousness, so that that consciousness doesn't exist. Okay, but if you can stay in touch with that, you know, then you can walk through fire, and that's what I suggest that people do. You got to get in touch with that during this time. It's essential, and whatever keeps you from getting in touch with it, you've got to hack it away. And so that means your relationships need to be supportive of that. That doesn't mean you isolate yourself from people, but your relationships need to be supportive of the type of consciousness that you want to create, or not even create, but you want to nurture. Your actions, your work, everything that you do should be aligned towards these ends so that there's no cognitive dissonance. And there is no room for hate either. That's really important. There is no room for hate. And this is the one thing that the left talks about, which ironically I think they get right. But it's not right in the way that they market it. Okay, there is no room for hate, but there's plenty of room for truth. And the two are very, very different. Okay, let me get out of here and do it in a reasonable and graceful fashion. Everybody in the chat, thank you. Where would we be without Trump? Scary. Obituary for county bets announced. Yeah, I saw that. That was the other thing too, right? That's another weird thing about Connor Betts. You know, there's a lot of high strange around the whole thing. A lot of high strange. Manson was just another MK. That's right. Absolutely. We talked about this last night. All right. Thanks for showing up today. Thanks for being a part of 15 Minutes of Flame. I'm Robert Phoenix. I'll be back tomorrow with another show and another walk through this portal. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. Have yourself a great day, and I'll be back on Wednesday. Take care for now.